You're listening to the Nerdverse Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Anton, and coming up, a solo adventures movie review of The Batman. Yes, that is right. I had just seen the movie today. I jotted down some thoughts, and we're just going to jump right into it because I've got a lot to say. And just a quick spoiler, I love the movie. So yeah, we'll get into it. Coming up, my solo adventures movie review of The Batman. All right, let's jump right into it with my quick overview of the film. This is a full spoiler-heavy discussion, so go watch it, then come right back. It's an incredible film. It is written and directed, directed by Matt Reeves, written by Matt Reeves and Peter Craig. Score by Michael Giacchino. I want to shout him out at the very top because he did an incredible job creating the music, creating the score, creating the theme, incorporating the theme throughout the entire film. And I think that is the first thing that stood out to me most, is just how rich and powerful the score was for this movie. The music here was far more of a character than in any other comic book superhero movie than I felt like in a long time. I think a lot of people would default to James Gunn films, Guardians 1, Guardians 2, Volume 2, and The Suicide Squad. Those are not scores. That's a soundtrack. He's using music that exists in real life and using those to tell different elements of the story, as well as being a character in some parts. But here, Michael Giacchino created original music to score this film, and it is very weighty and heavy, so big shout out to him. It plays an incredible part in the mood and feeling of the movie. My overall thoughts and feel about the movie is that it's very deep, dark, gritty, and heavy. It is a film noir. It is playing off of a lot of inspiration from movies of the past, Hollywood classics, mystery and detective story. This is a detective story. This is Batman as a detective. We've had many iterations of Batman on the big screen, but this, to me, is the quintessential version of him being a detective, solving a crime, being put in a situation where he has to go intellectually one-on-one with his adversary, the Riddler. So this movie is very much about the Batman, but we're going to start with the Riddler here. He was billed as the villain. He's very disturbed, but he is very much in control. In the comic book, The War of Jokes and Riddles, I think it's the most clearest definition of what separates the Riddler and any other villain in the Batman universe, and that's riddles are about order. They have a very specific, clear beginning, middle, and end. There is a logical track to them that produces an outcome. It's an equation. And I think Paul Dano does an amazing job bouncing back between seemingly unhinged, brutally violent, while also being in complete control of the situation and understanding how the dominoes will all fall. At the end of the movie, he does achieve his goal to a certain degree. I will just say that. Spoilers, okay? Spoiler heavy review. Just another heads up. At the very end of the movie, he does accomplish his goal in the sense that he floods the city. He floods Gotham and is very close to murdering all of the elites, all of the rich people, by trapping them into a building, trapping them in a stadium. Batman, of course, does not let that happen, but that is kind of the thread throughout this entire movie. It's how does the Riddler undo society using his version of order? And I think it's quite brilliantly done. throughout the movie. It's masterful. Paul Dano, again, amazing performance. You do get a very unsettled feeling from him. But if you really dig deep into what the Riddler represents, what a riddle represents, it is all about order. It's all about planning. It is all about thoughtful, methodical understanding of how to present a puzzle, how to present a problem, and then solving that problem. To the Riddler, solving that problem is through fear and chaos, and he accomplishes that to a certain degree, because Gotham is forever changed at the end of this movie. Let's get into the Batman a little bit here. So I saw the film in an Adobe theater at AMC. It is a superhero movie, obviously. So there is going to be some action. There's going to be some rousing special effects, but it's very much focused on all of those elements serving the Batman character. With the action, we are very much introduced to it at the very beginning of the movie, not too far from a couple of the first opening sequences to kind of build up into it, but executed so well. It is at a train stop that you see the Batman enter through the shadows. And then you immediately jump into him being a very capable fighter. It is bone crushing. It is visceral. It is very painful to watch. This movie is rated PG-13. However, you do feel the violence immensely. Immensely. There's very little blood, if nothing at all. The blood is very much dried up blood on weapons and things like that. But you do feel the pain. You do feel the unease of kind of the violence that's happening. And I think that is such a testament to Matt Reeves' directing and kind of understanding what you can do, how you can push violence to feel it without having to show every single gory, gruesome detail. With the Batman, he is a normal guy. He is not superhuman. He is incredibly capable, and they do a nice job showing that, but he's also a young version of Batman here, and I love that version of Batman because he's figuring it out. He's establishing who he is physically, intellectually, and where he stands morally. While doing that, he gets the shit kicked out of him so many times. He gets shot a number of times throughout the movie, and you do see him kind of recoil and really feel the pain and feel the brunt of a lot of the things that are happening to him physically. There is a scene where he glides down from the top of a building and he tries to land on top of a bus. He pulls his parachute. The parachute catches under a bridge. He hits the under the bridge, lands on top of the bus, rolls off the top of the bus onto the concrete. It is incredibly painful to watch because up until that point in the movie, you also have seen all the scars, bruises, bumps, pain points that a normal person would go through, and then also what that does to him physically during the day. And now he is sleepwalking. He is a zombie throughout the day, but he's doing it because he feels like that is his duty to provide protection, provide vengeance in the night. The entire movie is a case study on the Batman. They recontextualize the death of Thomas and Martha Wayne in a very clever way. We don't need to see it again in theaters. I think a lot of people know the origin story of Batman, but they use the story elements somewhat in a flashback newsreel type of way that informs what's happening present day in Gotham. And Thomas Wayne to Batman is his hero. That's his father. And we know a lot of the good deeds that he's done historically. We know that they are incredibly rich. And in this story, we're shown that he is running for mayor. They recontextualize it in that, and this is a classic Batman story that I feel like has been lost in history because it hasn't been retold as often as I would like. But Carmine Falcone and Thomas Wayne have an integral relationship. Carmine Falcone comes to Thomas Wayne's home in the middle of the night after he has been shot. He knows that Thomas Wayne is a doctor and that he, through the Hippocratic Oath, will save his life. He does. And they allude to that in the movie. And to me, I perked up because it's this amazing small story beat that connects Bruce Wayne and Thomas Wayne to the crime in Gotham in a much richer way than I think people realize. So Thomas Wayne feels like he has this relationship with Carmine Falcone. There is a reporter that essentially puts the family at risk by trying to reveal that Martha is unstable, clinically unstable, psychologically unstable. Martha has a very tormented past as well. Turns out Martha is Martha Arkham in this story. Kind of a twist, but again, it kind of connects so many other dots that, you know, it doesn't require a long backstory because you do recognize the name Arkham, and they also show Arkham Asylum in the film. With all that being said, Thomas asked Carmine Falcone to intervene with this reporter. Falcone eventually kills him, and we get the push and pull, the conflict of what Bruce Wayne thought he knew about his father and what he now knows about his father. Again, it's so rich and deep that there are many layers to kind of what the Batman represents in this movie. The Batman, Bruce Wayne, is troubled. You see it on his face in the entire movie. There are a lot of tight shots of, you know, the characters, specifically Robert Pattinson in a mask and without the mask. I think those are all very beautiful. It's all in the eyes. If you do get to watch it again, really pay attention to kind of the pain behind the eyes, because I think it's a subtle thing that not very many regular film watchers would pick up on, right? Like if you're not an actor, if you're not a person who works in the industry and really dissects movies as an art form, you may not really understand the nuance of what acting can be and how certain emotions and pieces of history can be expressed without words. I think Robert Pattinson here tells you everything you know about the troubled past of Bruce Wayne through his eyes in the entire movie. Brilliant. I want to take it back to the Riddler a bit. So they do tie the Riddler, his history with Bruce Wayne. Thomas Wayne is running for mayor, and he sets up a foundation, a fund to fund the city of Gotham for social services, for people who need help, for the underserved communities, for orphans. And the Riddler is an orphan. When Thomas Wayne dies, that money is nowhere to be seen. It is taken over by the mob. It is taken over by the government. It is taken over by elected officials, the police department. Anyone who wanted the money found a way to corrupt the system to access that money, and it no longer went to the Riddler. And that is where they are connected in this story. All the riddles do a nice job building up to that point. Everything is solely about the Batman, but it's also about this commentary on social structures. You know, people in power, people in privilege, controlling the flow of money, the control of information. And what does that mean for people who eventually grow up into spaces of intelligence and decide to take things into their own hands? Let's move on now to Selena Kyle, Catwoman, played by Zoe Kravitz. She's incredible. I think this movie, top to bottom, has the most incredible acting of any Batman movie. And in my personal opinion, any superhero movie. I think there's one superhero movie that I think has two performances that rival this. But as an ensemble, every single actor brought something incredibly nuanced, incredibly rich, incredibly emotionally deep with the character that you can pinpoint is specifically that character. What I mean by that is sometimes you watch a movie and you say, that actor is just playing themselves. Not a bad thing. Absolutely not. I would say John Cena in a lot of ways is playing his very goofy self as Peacemaker in the Suicide Squad, and I love it. I love it. But here, Selena Kyle Catwoman, Zoe Kravitz, she brings something out of what it means to be a discarded person in life. Her backstory in this movie is that she is the daughter of Carmine Falcone. Her mother worked at the club. Carmine Falcone is the father, but he does not acknowledge or accept that into their lives. He slept with her. He slept with one of the hostesses of the club, and Selena Kyle was born. And she carries that pain throughout the entire movie. There is a tension with every scene that Zoe Kravitz is in, where she's in the club, where she's trying to navigate all the different spaces. She works at the club for her ultimate goal to eventually steal from Carmine Falcone, to steal his riches, because that's what she's owed, right? Because she carries that pain and trauma. But ultimately, she wants to convey this message of the people in power who have access, who have funds. They did not get there by moral means. To her, she sees it as people are corrupt. People can't be trusted. So she's owed whatever it is that she wants and she takes. She's living in poverty. There are very clear parts of her apartment that they zoom in on where she doesn't have money for rent. Her apartment's a mess. Shout out to the cats, by the way. Really nice touch there. Not too heavy on the fact that she's air quotes Catwoman, but you know, right? You know the mythology, you know the story of Catwoman, but now you're bringing into the richness of the character of who she is as a person, what she's fighting for, and the edge that she's walking on, right? The Batman does pull her away from the edge, from killing, because he does say that once you've taken that leap, you lose a bit of your soul. Selena Kyle, amazing character. She is fighting for her roommate, who is also works at the club. Her name is Annika. We find out later in the movie that she dies, and she does want to avenge her as well. But it's really finding that line of what does it mean to avenge someone and what does it mean to do right by them. Alfred Pennyworth, played by Andy Serkis. You know, not that much screen time relative to the entire movie. The movie is almost 3 hours long. We don't get too much screen time, but his performance is incredibly emotionally impactful. He's the analog to Bruce Wayne's father. He's raised him. He's seen every piece of pain that Bruce Wayne has gone through. And what's amazing about this performance is you understand that the pain that Bruce Wayne has is the same pain that Alfred has experienced, because he loves this family. His purpose was to protect this family, to protect Thomas Wayne and Martha Wayne, and he did not do that. And that is why he is indebted to not only protecting Bruce, but teaching Bruce how to protect themselves. They do allude to it in the movie that he has trained him how to fight, but he can't be his father. And that's such a powerful moment where you can only do so much as a person, as a protector, as the caretaker for someone's life. But if there's something missing in that person, they do have to find it for themselves. And I think that's the back and forth between Alfred and Bruce in this movie. That's just very emotionally weighty and heavy. Right? Let's get into Jim Gordon. He is not the commissioner yet. I think he's just Detective Gordon at this point, played by Jeffrey Wright. He is the beacon of hope, the beacon of good in this movie, in the story of Batman. He is the one good cop but he does represent the side of the police department that is good, that has not yet been paid off by the mob. And I think he is a great partner to the Batman in the story. It is a detective story, so they do have to go and do detective things. For lack of a better way to put it, they have to solve the crime. They have to go to different crime scenes and really figure out the mystery and puzzle. And I think Jeffrey Wright does an excellent job of balancing out the Batman by being an ally to him, and you understanding why he feels like it's his duty to do the right thing. Again, not very much backstory, not very much history, but you as an audience member, if you know Batman, if you kind of have a vague idea of who these characters are, then it's understandable that you don't need too much of it explained. And I think that's kind of the most amazing thing about this movie. They don't explain everything. They don't explain very much. They allow you to breathe and live within the story and the characters and the people they introduce without too much explanation. Now let's get into the villains a bit. So we did talk about the Riddler, Paul Dano. Amazing. We'll kind of get back into him a little bit later on. Carmine Falcone, played by John Turturro, is incredibly unsettling, very charismatic, very much a mob boss, but really makes you believe that what he's doing is right, that his version of order works, even at the expense of regular everyday people, even at the expense of the elected officials that he has under his wing, even at the expense of people who are consuming the drugs that he's putting on the street. I think that's incredibly powerful, and I think it's incredibly frightening that John Turturro can come off that way. Again, it goes back into this ensemble of actors and actresses that create such a powerful movie, all the while focusing on Batman, the Batman, Robert Pattinson. I forget the exact number, but I do believe he's somewhere between 80 and 90% of the movie, Robert Pattinson, and yet you get so much depth from all of the other characters. We're going to end the character actor section here with an amazing performance by Colin Farrell, Oswald Cobblepot, the Penguin. He is in a full suit, prosthetics and everything to make him look a little heavier, a little older. He gets lost in the character. You do not know it is Colin Farrell. It is spectacular how much he dives into who the Penguin is at this point in the Penguin's history, because right now he is not a crime boss. He is just someone who works under Carmine Falcone. But he has aspirations. And you feel that, right? With the way that he thinks and sees and separates himself from what Carmine Falcone represents. Yes, he still wants to do it under this idea of crime, right? Controlling things illegally. But he understands the game. And to me, it's the acting choices that tell me that. It's nothing explicit in the script. It's nothing explicit on in the way that the story plays out. It's the acting choices that Colin Farrell makes. I think that's going to be a large theme throughout this entire episode, is I'm going to be praising the acting choices of all these actors. And also, shout out to Matt Reeves for directing the hell out of everyone in all of these scenes, right? All right. Let's get into some of the themes of the movie. So, the Batman, very much based on the Batman stories of the past, I think tackles a lot of themes that go over the heads of a lot of people, specifically in this movie, that don't get too much shine in other versions of the Batman. Specifically, The Dark Knight, I think, is very much a crime thriller with messages, with larger messages, right? I always go to just what the Joker represents as far as being an agent of chaos and anarchy, where this movie is very much a character study on what it means to be a person at different places in society. So let's take it one at a time. This is something from Selena Kyle. And she says she takes in strays. So this idea of what it means to be a stray, a person without a home, a person without a place to call their home. She says that line in the scene where they are in her apartment. It's been ransacked. She's looking for her friend Annika, but the Batman sees cats just all over the place. And she delivers that line with so much charm and charisma, with kind of a glint in her eye, looking up at the Batman saying, "You're just like me." And I think that speaks volumes. It speaks so loudly for what the Batman represents, right? It's someone who is lost, who is looking for a purpose, who is trying to understand the world, who sees something wrong in the world, who wants to actively try to change it, who in his heart knows what it means to be a morally good person, but also understands that there is pushback from the fact that the city of Gotham is so exposed by crime. It's this very it's almost intertwined with the soul and spirit of Gotham at this point. It's polluted, right? And the only way to in the Batman's eyes is to fix it, is to push back with violence. Kind of pulling it back to this idea of being a stray and someone who doesn't have a home. I think, when Bruce Wayne does experience the death of his parents, in this movie in particular, they do mention that a number of times, right? Where the death of his parents, he's not all alone. He has Alfred. Alfred is a very important part of this story. He also has money and power and access. But he himself has made the choice to want to live in this type of brooding darkness and at the recesses of his soul. Selena Kyle has chosen as well to live in this dark idea of what society is. But the Riddler shows Bruce Wayne at the end when they're at Arkham, you are not an orphan. You are at the top of the tower. You may not have your parents anymore. It is a tragedy what happened to them. But look at me. I was an orphan. I lived in a room with 30 other children. And then the money that was supposed to support us was taken away by the rich and powerful. You and I are the same. I think it's so powerful, right? Just this idea of being a stray, not having a home. Because, yes, Batman is our hero, but how he's doing his superheroics at this point in his career can also equally be wrong. That's incredibly powerful. It shows that our heroes are fallible. Our heroes don't have it all figured out. And I think that's the evolution of the character throughout the story. I think it creates an incredibly complex understanding of what a hero is supposed to be, how a hero learns how to be a hero, and how that impacts everyone else around them, how that impacts the people they are saving, how it impacts the city that they want to save. And in this journey that Robert Pattinson goes through, let's take it into the next theme that I noticed. It's this idea of scars. Everyone has pain. Everyone has scars under their clothes. But it's how you show them. It's how you let them, it's how you decide to represent them. And it's the choices you make. Are scars this badge of honor that allow you to look back at the past, learn from the past, and do better? Or are they things that you use to empower, to enrage you to move forward? Everyone is damaged. Everyone has something that they've gone through. I think everyone in this movie, all the characters in this movie, have a level of complexity and pain and history that I think in past versions of Batman would solely be focused on just the Batman. But here we're seeing so many different versions of what it means to not have anything or to be discarded. And it's your choice of what you do moving forward. Do you want to inflict pain onto others to cause scars for them, or do you want to heal? And that is something Bruce Wayne arrives at the end of the movie, when he is being a hero, when he is saving the day, when he goes to the stadium, to the arena that's being flooded, and he sees the people below are about to get shot by the Riddler's cult, I guess is a good way to put it. And he saves the day. He does superheroics. He jumps down from the rafters. He does really cool stuff. And it's in that moment where he understands that, yes, we all have scars, but we can all let the scars heal. And how we choose to move forward with that healing is a choice up to us. The last theme I'd like to go over is vengeance. Throughout the marketing campaign of this movie, throughout the very beginning of this movie, about 1/3 of the movie, it's very much emphasized that the Batman is vengeance. It was very curious to me when I heard that message that way, leading up to the movie and then going into the movie. And then I realized this is a young version of the Batman. He's only known pain. He has only known suffering. He has yet to experience empathy of other people. He has yet to experience hope and different symbols of what it means to be a good person. So throughout the first half of the movie, about 2/3 of the movie, it is all about inflicting pain and damage and vengeance towards those who would cause pain to others. And I think that is where a lot of the conflict that we see in Robert Pattinson's eyes comes from, right? It's not knowing yet. It's still being at that critical period in your mid-20s, in your late 20s, where you are so experienced in a lot of ways, and yet still have a lot to learn. We're introduced to the Batman at the very beginning of the movie with narration. And he talks about being the shadow. He is the shadow in the night. That he protects people by instilling fear into criminals. We're then later shown at the very end of the movie with the Riddler that he has taken that idea of fear to get what you want while incorporating violence. And that is where the Batman learns the lesson of vengeance can only get you so far. You have to evolve and change as a person. You have to allow people to have agency over their choices. You can't just be judge, jury, and executioner. Granted, he does have a line, he doesn't kill people. But there are many moments in the movie where he beats them close to death. Very clearly, they show moments of violence that the Batman pushes onto other people, pushes onto the criminals. That is debilitating. That is almost unhinged. I think that is still where the anger and frustration, pain of vengeance still resides within the character. It's not until the end of the movie that he understands that he needs to have hope. That justice is not vengeance. Justice is doing what's right. I think that's the delineation between the Riddler and the Batman at the end of the movie. It's a beautiful story. It's a beautiful way that they've unfolded that. It also leaves so much room for more because at the end of the movie, the Riddler, like I said, I feel like in a lot of ways does get away with it. He does kind of succeed in where his plans go, but what he ultimately wanted to do was unravel the Batman and unravel society by killing a lot of the higher ups. But it was the resolve of the people, the resolve of Batman that did not happen. But Gotham has changed forever. We see the Riddler in Arkham, in a cell, next door to the Joker. Let's just let's call a spade a spade. He says something to the effect of, when you're at the bottom, you're just a joke. And it's very clear now that there's going to be some kind of relationship between the Joker and the Riddler in future stories. I want it. I want it all. So let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about kind of the things moving forward within the story, right? So I think this movie does a nice job of showing a very great starting point for the Batman. A very complete story of what crime can do as far as eroding society, and how crime and evil is cyclical. It's not something you can just solve in one day. It's something you have to continue to fight against. Something you have to fight against, to push back against, for the betterment of the people, to give people hope. Because ultimately there are good people. And I'm just very excited for more stories. All right. Let's get into some recommendations. So, this movie draws a lot of inspiration from a number of different Batman stories that I picked out as I was watching them. I saw specifically different elements of detective work, Batman, as well as the Joker and the Riddler, and kind of the relationship that they will inevitably have in this story, but also kind of elements that they borrowed from each other, as far as how the Riddler was portrayed. Very, very unhinged at certain points, but also very controlled and understood. So, recommendations. Comic book recommendations. Batman Hush. You see it behind me. An amazing detective story where Batman is trying to solve or figure out who Hush is. That is a villain. The introduction of Hush. It's got a lot of really cool elements in comic books, where we do get Batman versus Superman at some point. We do get the rogues gallery of different villains. But I think it's just a really cool detective story where he's trying to figure out who a person from his past is. So you do find out that Hush is someone who has affected Batman deeply from his past. The next story I'd like to recommend is The Long Halloween. I think that is the primary inspiration for this story. Everything between the narration, the noir feel, the use of dates and timestamps throughout the movie. The Long Halloween is a story that takes place over the course of a calendar year. It starts on Halloween. The Batman begins on Halloween. Every month, there is a killing, and we find out that there is a killer called the Calendar Killer. We don't know who it is because it's supposed to be left a bit nebulous, but it's a way to incorporate all of Batman's rogues galleries as they ascend to the top of the crime ladder, while dethroning Salvador Maroni and Carmine Falcone. This is probably my favorite Batman story in comic books of all time. The last two more stories. So the next one is No Man's Land. At the very end of the movie of the Batman, the Riddler blows up water reserves or dams tactically throughout Gotham to flood the city and essentially cut it off from society and cause havoc and chaos. And there is some narration at the end of the movie where the Batman talks about looting and an upheaval of civility. And that is what No Man's Land is. The bridges of Gotham are destroyed. The city is just an isolated island, and it's separated from the government. The people of Gotham have to fend for themselves. Somewhat of a Lord of the Flies concept. And I thought they were going to do that. I actually think they're setting up No Man's Land for the future movies, where this is how the breeding ground of violence, crime, and the rogues gallery will arrive. Is that you have the Riddler starting it off, in a cell next to the Joker. What does that mean for other villains who want to take it to the next level to be as extreme as the Batman? And that is what No Man's Land represents. No Man's Land does that quite well. It's the parallel is incredible. At the end of that movie, you're just like, this is what's going to happen next. And the last recommendation I have is The War of Jokes and Riddles. It is the battle between the Joker and the Riddler. It is where this idea of order and chaos is explicitly described within Batman, showing you the delineation between what a joke is and what a riddle is. And I think that gives you a really nice starting point for how to understand the Riddler as a character here in this movie. Yeah. Thank you everyone for listening to my rambles here. It was a bit of an impromptu review. I jotted some thoughts down. I jotted some notes down. It's just my quick response to everything. If I'm gonna give, I'm not gonna give it a hot take, but I will just say, if you want a Batman story that really dives deep into the character of the Batman while doing very cinematic movie-going experience type theatrics, this is the movie for you. It's incredibly dramatic. It's incredibly weighty and heavy. In a lot of ways, I feel like it's very critically acclaimed friendly. I think The Dark Knight is the go-to for a lot of the standard for what people like to believe is a very critically acclaimed friendly movie, which it is. I think The Dark Knight is always going to be always going to be compared to Batman movies in the future. I just think this movie is just doing something incredibly different, where it's giving you depth of character in a way that I don't think most movies have accomplished, whether it's the Batman, whether it's comic book movies, whether that's just any crime noir movie. You're getting the full spectrum of characters, their motivations, and why they are the way they are in this movie. Why crime has seeped into the soul of this movie, into the city, and what one person, one character is trying to do to fight back against it as it's becoming more and more extreme. Yeah, that's my review of the Batman. Let me know what you think. Leave me a message. Thank you everyone for listening to the Nerdverse Adventures. Follow on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever you listen to podcasts, and find the show on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at the Nerdverse Adventures. This is Anton, and this has been the Nerdverse Adventures.